Hi, my name is Brock Miller. This is Rhetoric Speech 2, and mine is on the topic of bullying and stress and coping mechanisms. There are numerous perspectives to make sense of the world around us. When focusing on specific aspects of a person's life, you can glean an interesting perspective on what it means to be human. During your life, you'll encounter certain positive and negative stimuli which shape and prime your brain for who and what you will become. The awakening in my life came in the 8th grade. I began to feel alien from my own body, a dark cloud began to loom overhead, and I had my first experience with depression. I felt removed from the flow of life, and I felt stifled and didn't have the words to communicate what I felt. During this time in my life, my parents took me to a counselor in Peoria, Illinois. Rudy was nice, and he began asking probing questions that seemed all centered around trauma. He took into context my interactions with schoolmates, home life, and interactions with my family. And when I began, and this is when I began to fight a different fight. The bullies in my grade used this time to attack my insecurities and could identify whatever they could to upset me, as they could tell that I wasn't there's something different about me at the time. It left me feeling raw and guarded, and my mother noticed as I snapped at my siblings and wasn't being myself, nor the context to even think like that, as I grew up in a church around siblings and friends, that we didn't really fight in vicious, attacking ways like that. And this time in my life in the 8th grade became incredibly valuable, though painful. I experienced my first sojourn into the emotional aspects of bullying. The research on the causes and effects of still affect me, are very valuable and are a tool that can be used to benefit me to this day. There are some factors that push someone to a healthy coping path. The sociological approach focuses on how an individual is acted upon in their environment. The neuroscience approach focuses on how the brain is affected chemically and structurally, and the psychological approach that focuses on how a person deals with certain stimuli in their life emotionally. These key perspectives in understanding the duality of stress and coping of a person fall into the categories of neuroscience, sociology, psychology, as a developing person endures bullying. The sociology article written by Robert Thornburg goes into the need to reduce the focus of different types of identities that encourage differentiation, so things that can be identified as a group that are picked upon. So the differentiation of those labels used to discriminate the victims. Attention away from the broader contextual factors such as school, culture, discursive practices, social identities, gender norms, racism, disability discrimination, heteronormativity, body discrimination, and other hegemonies. He uses the distinctions for the study in the course of bullying prevention and education. The label itself is dangerous for the policymakers and the students alike, and indicates that it is important not labeling oneself victim nor bully. He places the focus of the identification of identities used to discriminate. He shows the power of words. You can use them to form a negative identity for yourself or a positive one. And it's very important to be able to step outside of the label that the bullies place on you. The psychological approach to coping from bullying is an emotional intelligence and how one manages trauma. According to the StopBullying.org, bullying is all about power and a discernment between power between one person and another. As the bullies approach, their attack vectors are numerous, oftentimes physical and psychological. A person's self-worth is established within the first 5 years of life, according to the University of Washington study. The study focused on children, and they would identify terms that they associated with themselves. The University of Washington article also goes into how crucial self-esteem is, and it's saying that it's set at 5 years old. Currently, there are other avenues for dealing with different self-esteem building tools. The attachment is a broad psychological factor whose association with mental health outcomes, social functions, and many other life domains, as well as well-established developmental and clinical psychology. From the perspective of individual differences in coping with stress or bullying, attachment may prove to be a factor with wide connections to other types of psychological variables. It is, for example, known to be related to the quality of regulation of emotional states, which influences the perception of control. To then be in control and find ways to moderate the stress of being bullied with peer support. And feeling vulnerable, often circumvented by the attachment to loved ones and the psychological buffering, which is working with a peer or friend or parent to help them to internalize and use their words and to identify what happened when they were bullying and how to deal with it. When it comes to emotional abuse, there are common negative consequences. The physiological response induced can have prolonged negative effects on the brain. Psychological and physical stressors, such as being the target of a bully, activate the stress system centered on the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, also known as the HPA axis. The role of the HPA and other hormones is to promote adaptation and survival, but chronically elevated hormone levels can cause problems. Stress has a ubiquitous effect on the physiology of the brain. It alters levels of many hormones and biomarkers and ultimately affects behavior. Therefore, both the general understanding of stress during the early adolescence and where known specific links between stress and bullying can provide insight into the enduring effects of bullying. Therefore, studies indicate that emotional trauma has serious negative health consequences. Prolonged exposure to stress has damaging effects on various parts of your central nervous system, and specifically your amygdala, which is responsible for stress in the fight or flight scenarios, giving the increased levels of anxiety, and for those who are developing can cause emotional trauma and also emotional consequences throughout life. Dr. John Ratey, in the book Spark, Harvard neurologist, goes on to talk about how the brain can actually repair itself through a chemical called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. 20 minutes of exercise, continuous exercise, this chemical will go in and attach itself, and through blood flow and this chemical, it can actually increase the robustness of the brain and actually make your brain more dense and a lot better for you over the long run, where we used to think that once the brain was damaged, it was damaged and that was it. So the controversy that we can view our personal trauma in a number of ways. Oftentimes the goal of the bully is to make the victim feel isolated and powerless. You can accept the identity given to you, or you can forge your own. Letting a bully affect your life beyond the interactions can have many different effects, most of which in the moment are negative. But in those moments, we can develop grit, strength, and a new sense of self. Bullying can have negative academic effects. There are a host of other physiological symptoms, such as anxiety, neuroticism, and depression that one can endure from it, and some have even been driven to suicide. During our youth, there are countless memories that we all have from school. Perhaps it's an embarrassing moment, a fight, or some significant positive event. It's hard enough going through these changes that one endures. In the journey of understanding myself, I was now looking at it through the context of emotion. I felt adrift in a internal sea by myself. The modern bully aims to isolate their victims on a sociopathic control, and in a school of 50 children in my class, there was nowhere to hide. When I was younger, I would fight off bullies, and as you age, you cannot be physical, so it moved on to more psychological types of bullying. And so, even though this was a negative thing, it also allowed for me to grow and become a more well-rounded and understanding adult. The goal of the Newtonian reductionalist paradigm is to create a dissection of parts, to look at it and to say, and to reassemble it and make it better. And look at all the different meta components that can go on to make something whole. With a person, it is in the value of connectivity, that means the reduction of stress and avoiding of positive, negative, and psychological trauma. And today, we find our tribe with the internet and loved ones. We're continuing to grow in our understanding of what bullying and psychological trauma does to a person. And there are a lot of unique features that humans possess, and we have the ability to adapt and change our identity and also to hold on to what identities that we choose to value about ourselves. So we can either take our brokenness and redefine ourselves and grow from it, and look at the world through our own actions and stand on our own 2 feet. So, thank you.